Prime Minister Mark Carney keeps repeating the same line. 85% of Canada's trade with the United States is tariff-free.
Emily, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of what you just heard from Ambassador Hoekstra when he says that Canada did not get that same extension, when he sort of cited the energy in the room? What do you make of that?
Yes. So what I make of it is that beyond the energy in the room, I know that it's hard for us as Canadian to hear this, but there is a specific policy agenda that Donald Trump has. What he wants is to have the auto sector in the U.S. and in the U.S. only. There are certain industries that he wants to have in the U.S. Basically only, or as much as possible, including lumber, including a lot of things that are now produced in Canada. And so there are some non-negotiable from his point of view that would make it hard for us to strike a deal. And I think the only way out for us is midterm, long-term pressures from the American, realizing that what Donald Trump actually wants is dumb. But that's going to take a while, because as long as that's what Donald Trump wants to actually, and he said it in not so subtle ways, destroy the Canadian auto sector, for example, there isn't a way to negotiate a deal out of his actual objective.
He said it Tuesday, he said it again Friday. And every time he's pressed about Donald Trump's escalating trade war, out comes that magic number. The messaging has become so predictable that analysts are now openly questioning whether Carney can deliver on his campaign promises while maintaining this optimistic stance. His position appears definitively weakened, caught between treating the tariff situation as an urgent crisis while simultaneously advocating for patience with the negotiation process. But here's the thing, that 85% figure is hiding a much more complicated and concerning reality that Canadian businesses are living through right now. So what's really going on behind Carney's confident claims? And why are small businesses scrambling to figure out a trade system they never had to navigate before? To understand what's happening, we need to rewind to March 2025. That's when Trump first slapped Canada with 25% tariffs under something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. His justification? Border security and stopping fentanyl from flowing into the United States. Never mind that fentanyl seizures at the northern border are a fraction of what happens at the Mexican border. Trump needed a reason, and he found one. But here's where it gets interesting. Trump also announced that goods complying with the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, would be exempt from these tariffs. That's the trade deal Trump himself negotiated back in 2018 to replace NAFTA. So suddenly, CUSMA compliance became the golden ticket for Canadian exporters. Fast forward to August 1st, and Trump cranked up the pressure. The tariffs jumped from 25% to 35% on goods that aren't CUSMA compliant. And that's when Carney started throwing around his 85% figure even more aggressively. Because technically, he's not wrong. About 85% of Canadian exports have the potential to qualify for CUSMA exemptions. But potential and reality are two very different things, and that's where Carney's messaging starts to fall apart. See, that 85% represents goods that could theoretically qualify for tariff-free treatment under CUSMA. It doesn't represent the goods that are actually getting that treatment. The difference is massive, and it's costing Canadian businesses real money right now. According to U.S. Census Bureau data, only about 38% of U.S. imports from Canada were actually traded under CUSMA provisions last year. Think about that for a moment. Less than half of eligible trade was actually using the agreement that's supposed to be protecting Canadian exports. Why such a huge gap? Because for years, Canadian exporters didn't need to bother with CUSMA certification. They could trade under something called Most Favored Nation status, basically the standard World Trade Organization rules, that gave them very low or zero tariffs without jumping through any hoops. It was simpler, faster, and cheaper. But Trump's tariffs changed everything overnight.
Okay, so let me be very clear. I'm 100% supportive of the Prime Minister and the federal government. And when you sit around at a family dinner table, you discuss all sorts of ideas, and that's what we're going to do. But just in the last 3 months, we've seen the U.S. auto industry face $6.2 billion in tariff-related costs, with most of them projecting significantly higher costs for the year. We're looking at 37,000 manufacturing jobs that have disappeared in the U.S., and factory employment is the lowest it's been in 5 years, which is not a good thing. And you see what happens with President Trump. Someone gives them the wrong job numbers that are accurate job numbers, they get fired. Well, you know, President Trump has to realize it's costing companies billions of dollars. Procter & Gamble cost them $1 billion. You look at Mattel, you look at all the Ford Motor Company and all the auto companies. He said it would create economic growth. He said it would create jobs. I went out there at the same time and said it's going to be a disaster. Tariff on Canada is going to be a tax on Americans. So far, this is what's happened. It's hurting American companies. So they need to shift and start looking at working collaboratively with us, looking at the AmCan fortress, put a ring around America and the US, in Canada, have the two strongest nations in the world.
Suddenly, that easy MFN route became expensive, 35% expensive. And Canadian businesses found themselves scrambling to understand a certification process they'd never needed before. The economic impact has been devastating on both sides of the border. The U.S. auto industry alone has absorbed $6.2 billion in tariff-related costs. Manufacturing employment has hit a 5-year low, with 37,000 American jobs lost since April. Major companies like Procter & Gamble and Ford Motor Company are feeling the squeeze. As Ontario Premier Doug Ford puts it, a tariff on Canada is essentially a tax on the American people. Yet the policies continue to escalate. Take Steve Malia, who runs Starfield Optics in Toronto with his wife Natalie. They manufacture telescopes and accessories, exactly the kind of small business that should benefit from North American e-trade. But when Trump started threatening Canada's economy in January, their orders dried up literally overnight. Registering his small business for CUSMA benefits wasn't a priority until Trump began threatening Canada's sovereignty. For the past 8 months, he's been researching the certification process without the same legal resources as a large corporation. He's got a part-time bookkeeper and a chartered accountant. That's it. But now he needs to navigate complex rules of origin requirements that can make or break his business. And Malia's not alone. Thousands of small and medium-sized Canadian businesses are facing the same challenge. They're discovering that CUSMA compliance isn't just a matter of filling out a form. It's a complex web of requirements that can vary dramatically depending on what you're selling. Here's how it actually works. To qualify for CUSMA benefits, goods need to meet specific rules of origin requirements. If your product is wholly obtained or produced in Canada, like minerals you mine or crops you grow, you're automatically compliant. Easy enough, but if you're manufacturing something using imported components, things get complicated fast. You might need to prove that enough transformation happened in North America, or that a certain percentage of your product's value comes from within the CUSMA region, or that your imported inputs underwent a specific tariff classification change during production. For automobiles, the rules are even more stringent. Vehicles need 75% CUSMA regional value content. At least 70% of a producer's annual steel and aluminum procurement must come from North America. And 40 to 45% of the vehicle's value must come from facilities paying workers at least $16 per hour. The paperwork alone can be daunting. Exporters need to certify that their goods meet origin requirements through detailed documentation. They have to maintain records for at least 5 years in case of an audit. And they need to work with their U.S. customers to make sure the right forms are filed with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Tyler Meredith, a former economic advisor to the Trudeau government and founding partner of policy firm Meredith, Bosanquet and Phillips, argues that citing Carney's 85% figure understates the costs Canadian businesses are actually facing. We are one of the most trade-dependent on the United States of any developed country, Meredith points out. If the consequence is that trade overall falls, as we are seeing now in the data, that's going to be a cost that we disproportionately bear relative to other countries. And the data backs him up. Trade between Canada and the U.S. has been declining since Trump's tariffs kicked in. Some businesses are absorbing the higher costs, others are looking at markets beyond the United States for the first time. Many are caught in between, trying to figure out whether the cost of CUSMA certification is worth it, or whether they should just pay the tariffs and pass the costs on to customers. Meanwhile, Trump isn't done. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is warning that Trump could choose to pull the carpet out from underneath us by reopening CUSMA entirely. The agreement is scheduled for renegotiation in July 2026, but Trump has shown he's willing to act unilaterally when it suits his purposes. At any given time, President Trump can pull the carpet out from underneath us on CUSMA tomorrow with one signature, Ford told reporters. So let's be prepared. I think it'll be coming in November. He's going to come at us with double barrels, so we better be ready. That uncertainty is creating a massive headache for Canadian businesses. They're being forced to invest time and money in CUSMA compliance for a system that Trump could scrap at any moment. It's like being asked to build a house on quicksand. The Yale Budget Lab published an analysis assuming that about 50% of Canada's exports to the US are now certified under CUSMA. That's higher than the 38% from last year, suggesting that businesses are indeed scrambling to get compliant. But it's still nowhere near the 85% that Carney keeps citing. And even for businesses that do get CUSMA certified, there are no guarantees. Trump has already imposed separate tariffs on steel, aluminum, and certain automotive products that bypass CUSMA entirely. He's using different legal authorities, like Section 232 national security provisions, to target specific sectors regardless of their CUSMA status.
Yeah, well, this is going to hit a lot of products that we Americans love to buy. Computers, electronics, coming in from countries like China, Vietnam, Malaysia being hit with 30, 20, 19% tariffs. Clothing and shoes coming in from China, Vietnam, India, going to be hit with 30, 20%, 25 tariffs. Watches now on the list because of Americans' love for Swiss watches. That's going to be tariffed at 39%. Alcohol coming in from the European Union, countries like France and Italy. That's wine and spirits going to be tariffed at 15%, and toys being tariffed at 30 to 20% coming in from China and Vietnam. There are many, many estimates to suggest what this may cost American families. The most recent estimate that we have is from the Yale Budget Lab just this month, projecting that because of all of these tariffs, if they stay in effect, it's going to cost the average family $2,400 a year. Obviously, that is significant, as Americans, we know, are worried about these tariffs, worried about their finances, worried about inflation. That is a significant hit to the average American family.
The impact extends far beyond abstract trade statistics. Everyday products that Americans rely on are becoming more expensive. Computers and electronics face 30% tariffs from China. Clothing and shoes carry 20 to 25% tariffs from various countries. Swiss watches now come with a 39% premium. European wine and spirits cost 15% more. Even toys face 20 to 30% tariffs. According to the Yale Budget Lab, these tariffs will cost the average American family $2,400 per year, a significant financial hit at a time when Americans are already worried about inflation and their finances. So when Carney says 85% of trade is tariff-free, he's painting a picture that doesn't match the reality on the ground. Yes, many Canadian exports can potentially avoid Trump's tariffs, but the emphasis is on potentially. The certification process is complex, expensive, and time-consuming. The real story isn't about Carney's statistics. It's about the thousands of Canadian businesses caught in the middle of a trade war they didn't start and can't control. It's about small manufacturers like Steve Malia trying to navigate bureaucratic requirements that large corporations take for granted. It's about the growing uncertainty that's making it harder for Canadian companies to plan for the future. Carney's 85% figure might be technically accurate, but it's also misleading. It suggests a level of protection that simply doesn't exist in practice. Canadian businesses are learning the hard way that potential tariff exemptions and actual tariff exemptions are two very different things. And with Trump threatening to reopen CUSMA entirely, even that potential protection could disappear. Canadian exporters aren't just dealing with current tariffs, they're trying to prepare for a future where the rules could change at any moment. That's the real story behind Carney's confident claims. It's not about the 85% of trade that could be tariff-free. It's about the businesses struggling to navigate a system that's more complicated, more expensive, and more uncertain than their prime minister's soundbites suggest. The numbers might add up on paper, but for Canadian businesses dealing with Trump's trade war, the math is a lot more complicated than Carney makes it sound.